Welcome back to Introduction to Talmudic Legal Logic. In this lecturette, we'll talk about logical and scriptural arguments. Consider the following scenario. A toddler says to his mom, "Why can't I have more ice cream?" And his mom tries to explain to him, "Eating too many sweets is not good for you. You need to eat food that provides you with vitamins, minerals, fiber, and other nutrients." As a mom, I know that sometimes you don't get very far with these kinds of logical explanations, and sometimes you find yourself resorting to the following argument. Because I said so. What we're going to find out is that this idea of whether to explain something logically or appeal to authority is something that is present in Talmudic argumentation as well. Generally speaking, when you look at Talmudic argumentation, you're going to see three approaches. The first one we're going to call kra. Kra is an appeal to a biblical verse, expression, word, or even sometimes a root or a single letter that might shed light on an entire biblical section or explain a Mishnah or explain some rule. The other one we're going to call svara. Svara means some common sense practical assertion or the use of a Talmudic logical operation. Or sometimes we're going to find some combination of both. The way the combinations are going to appear isn't generally two ways. The first one is when the rabbis use a biblical text but apply a logical operation to the text itself. So, for example, they'll be comparing texts to each other through context because there's a word that appears in both, or they'll try to make an argument a fortiori, which is to say, if this is the case for that set of circumstances, for sure this is the case for this set of circumstances. Sometimes they'll read the biblical rule very carefully, trying to discern whether there are rules and exceptions and what exactly is the combination of those. So sometimes the biblical text itself will be the subject of some logical structure. And often a rabbi might state that his position can be supported both by logic and by scriptural citation. The term that the Talmud often uses for this kind of situation is ibait ema svara, ibait ema kra. If you will, you can say this from logic. If you will, you can say this from a scriptural citation. Let's take a look at an example and see how two rabbis are tackling a legal question using logic and using scriptural citations. The problem involves the question of means investigation for charity recipients. This is a problem that appears in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Bava Batra, page 8b. The context is giving charity to the poor. Biblical sources create an obligation to be generous to the poor. You can find these verses in Deuteronomy that require people to give to the poor, and you'll find some appeal to social justice and to being generous to the poor in Isaiah as well, and various other biblical markers. There are also Tannaitic sources that discuss extensively how charity should be provided, how much charity should be provided, and under which circumstances. And you can find two examples of this discussion in Mishnah Pe'ah 8 and in Tosefta Pe'ah 4. The context of charity of the poor in our discussion today presents two conflicting values. On one hand, we're being encouraged to provide for the poor in a way that respects the poor person's dignity, right? Not to shame people when we're giving them charity. On the other hand, we want to make sure that our generosity is not being exploited, that the people who are asking us to give a donation are not charlatans, are fakers who are taking away from our public reservoirs and taxing the community. And by doing so fraudulently, they're eroding the public's faith. We want to maintain the legitimacy of almsgiving so that people generally have trust that the people they're giving money to really are poor and are really in need. So the question is under which circumstances are we going to authorize investigating putative charity recipients to make sure that they really have a genuine need? The conflict in this matter is between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda. Let's understand the positions of each sage. Rav Huna says, you investigate if the person asks for food, but you do not investigate if the person asks for clothing. And then he says, Iba'et ema svara, ve'iba'et ema kra. I can explain this using logic, and I can also explain this using scripture. He starts off by explaining it using logic. He says, the naked person is exposed to shame and contempt, and the hungry person is not, at least not visibly being shamed. And because of that, maybe there's less urgency in investigating the hungry than there is in preserving the dignity of the naked. But he also has a scriptural reason for why he thinks you investigate people who ask for food but not people who ask for clothing. He's looking at a verse in Isaiah 58:11 which deals with the hungry. And he says that the word pros, which means give your bread to the poor, is spelled in an unusual way in the text. It's spelled with the Hebrew letter shin instead of the letter samech. And this suggests that you must investigate because the word pros with a shin looks a lot like the word prosh, which means to look, to search, to investigate. And the obligation to cover the naked in Isaiah 58:11 is in obligatory terms, suggesting an emergency. You must do this right now. So this is Rav Huna's opinion, and as you can see, he can provide logical reasons for his proposition as well as a scriptural anchor for it. Here's Rav Yehuda, who holds the opposite view. Rav Yehuda believes that you have to investigate if the person is asking for clothing, but not if they ask for food. And again, he says, Ibait ema svara ve'ibait ema kra. I can justify my position using logic, and I can also justify it, if you will, using scripture. Here is his svara explanation. He says the hungry is suffering, probably more so if the assistance is being delayed, while the naked is not. But what is the scriptural anchoring for why you investigate the naked but not the hungry? Well, he says the Isaiah text makes no condition for feeding the hungry. It says, give the person money or give the person bread. But when it talks about the naked, it says, should you see a naked person, cover them. So there is a proposition that you have to wait and see the naked person, perhaps waiting to see truly if the person is naked or if they're deceiving you. So here you have two sages providing reasons that are opposite for the same proposition. They have different interpretations, but each of them can provide logic as well as scripture to support his position.